Bob, good morning.
Good morning.
Appreciate you taking some time out for us today.
Well, thanks for having me.
Let's start with Medicaid. That may be the
Okay.
biggest issue in the state today.
Sure.
Move to the private managed care approach. What's your opinion of that change to the managed care? How do you think that has worked to this point?
Well, in general, it's not working as well as what we would expect it to, or perhaps had planned for it to work. So there are some things that need to be done with it, perhaps major things, in fact. But, with the change in the Affordable Care Act, our Medicaid system was going to go out of business in about 5 or 6 years, and so something had to be done, and that was what the urgency was, to do something at that particular point. But it's still a work in progress, and I believe that. I don't think we should abandon what has been done, but I think we can make it better. I met with one of the hospital boards, and their major problem with it probably comes down to a cash flow problem, in that they cannot deny coverage to, or treatment, I should say, not coverage, but treatment to anybody who comes in the hospital. But the problem that they're having is that then everything has to go through the MCOs for approval. And they may not hear one way or another for sometimes months. And so they have a cash flow problem that results from that. So one of the things I believe that we can do, and I've actually spoken with our governor about this, and she agrees, we ought to have a schedule of procedures that ought to be automatically covered and automatically taken care of by Medicaid. Now, that would serve two things. Number one is it would help with an immediate cash flow for those providers. But the other thing it would do, it would cut back on the workload that the MCOs have in trying to figure out whether to cover something. Because one of the problems that was expressed to me by the hospital board was obviously they want to have everything paid for. But a second thing would be to know that they're not going to be paid for a certain one, because then they can address that budgetarily. And so what that would do would, I think, expedite those procedures that would have to be judged for their, as to whether they're going to be covered. So I think that might be something that's coming. I know that I'm pretty interested in looking at that, and I've talked with a number of our legislators about that, and I think that can happen.
So your approach is more, let's take the existing private managed care approach that we've adopted and make improvements to that, rather than just
yes, exactly.
throw it out the window and go back to what we did before.
Exactly. There are other things too. I asked this question of the board. I said, what would your estimate be for the percentage? And I said, you probably don't have statistics on this, but what would your estimate be on the number, excuse me, of treatments that are done for people who might have been able to avoid that if their lifestyles were different? And they said, well over 50%. Well, our MCOs do not have what the MCOs in some other states do. They have a pretty robust wellness program in some of those other states to try to minimize the amount of people who are or at least lessen the number of people who are taking part in the Medicaid program. And it seems to be working in those states, and that has not yet happened here. And so another encouragement would be to the MCOs to begin that. And perhaps a joint effort by the state and the MCOs would be a good effort there.
All right. Mm-hmm. Next issue is education, K-12 public education.
Sure.
Another big topic of debate and kind of a divisive point in terms of how much money the state spends on K-12. I think the state aid increase was around 1% this past session.
That's right.
Do you think the state of Iowa underfunds public education? What
No.
would you, if you were in the legislature this last session, would you have advocated for a larger increase in state aid?
I think I think what we do is we focus on the percent increase, but the percent increase that we have is a percent of a very large number. Okay, so the actual dollars that are put into it are pretty good. In fact, I believe I'm correct about this. we are, we spend about 45% of the state budget on education. That's a huge amount. We've increased that up to about, I think we're up to, I don't exactly know what the figure is, and I wouldn't be even guess on that, but our salaries, our average salary in the state is in the top 10. I believe it's number 8 in the nation, which probably puts us even higher than that because of, you know, we're compared to states like Connecticut and New York and other places like that. But there are things to be done in education. I've spoken with a number of teachers over the last months, and you know what? I've had one teacher tell me that our funding is not adequate. Everybody else is talking about other things that we can do to improve our education system, and I've got a lot of plans on that because, as you probably know, I spent 35 years teaching in the public schools, so I know that pretty well. And so there's much to be done, but I do not believe that our funding is inadequate. I think it's, you know, there's always going to be increases, of course, because cost of living and cost of everything keeps going up. But I do believe that we're adequate.
The package of tax cuts approved by the legislature this last session, would you have voted for that package of tax cuts? Do you think that was a good bill? I
think that in general that was a good bill. I do. I think there are and in fact some of those have not even kicked in yet, but there were things that needed to be done. We had to get in line with the federal code because if we didn't do that, there would have been no tax relief for anybody. And I think one of the best things that happened, of course, was a reduction in corporate taxes because that has promoted a job boost in our state. I believe the latest figures show that there are actually more jobs available than there are people to fill them right now, which should result in higher pay for people.
That was one of the criticisms your opponent shared of the bill, was that he thought it went to the people who least needed to have tax relief, wealthy individuals and corporations. But you actually believe the corporate tax rate decrease was a good thing.
I do, because you know what, I've had that discussion with a lot of people who say, well, corporations are all getting a tax break. Corporations don't pay taxes because what they do is pass it along to their, you know, to the people who are buying from them, and you know, we pay the taxes. They don't look like taxes, but they are the taxes. It's the cost of business.
Goods and services.
And I don't say that to try to demean corporations. It's just that's business. I mean, that's the way you do business. You measure what your costs are, and then you pass them along. So I think in total, because not everything is kicked in yet, so it's a little early to try to make
a
full assessment of that. You know.
Can I ask though about
sure.
Certainly people are having to work more than one job to be able to pay their bills because they're not getting benefits from their employers.
Right.
So what can we do to change that? What can we say? You know, it's great to say that we have low unemployment, but it should be good employment. It should be employment that gives a person a decent wage for a day's work, and they shouldn't have to look everywhere to fill in those gaps. So what can we do to make that change?
I think that answer is multifaceted. I think there are a lot of different things that can help with that. One of them is training. You know, I think a large percentage of the people who are working 2 jobs are working at jobs that if they had been better trained at, they would probably not be working at. They'd be working at different jobs that would come with benefits, with those kinds of things. So that's one aspect of it. But I also think that just the free market can help in these areas. Maybe not totally, but it can help in these areas because right now we have a preponderance of jobs, and if the employers want people, they're going to have to start to attract them with things like benefits, like those other things. That's not going to ever happen overnight, but it will come with time. And if we keep the economy moving, I think that's an advantage. I think those 2 things will
when we give breaks to companies to come in and land in Iowa,
right?
Shouldn't there be some kind of stipulation or some kind of tie to that to say, you know, in exchange for this, we want to make sure that you are giving the kind of jobs and the kind of benefits and the kind of whatever we need to make sure our people are being protected for that.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that, I think some of those stipulations should be put into effect, especially if we're going to be giving breaks. I don't disagree with that at all. I do, however, think that we should not be putting penalized things in place because we're going to discourage people from,
Sure.
corporations from coming. But I do think we ought to give some stipulations, and in fact, I think that's already happened with some businesses that have been given breaks. They've, what's the guarantee? How many jobs are you going to provide? How many jobs with benefits? All those kinds of things. I think that's happened right here in Sioux City.
And that was one of the questions I had on my list too, was one of the criticisms you hear this year on the campaign trail, whatever the race is, if it's a legislature
Sure.
race or it's the governor's race, is how much money the state spends on economic development incentives. I mean, the one side says the state spends too much and doesn't get the bang for the buck that it should, and the other side says it's essential. We have to do this to compete. Where do you fall on that?
Well, especially in this region where we are competing with two other states, that's, I think generally across the state it's always going to be an argument. It's never going to be one that's not going to be on the table, because we do have to provide incentives because we're in competition across the United States for industry, and we are not, I mean, we're obviously very ag-based here, but there are other industries that we need to get in place and to bring in. So the incentives are important. There's no question about it. However, spending tax monies outrageously to provide incentives that, and only incentives for those, I think has to be modified also.
The one that's getting a lot of attention recently is the Apple package of incentives.
Yeah.
And I believe it was Waukee.
Yeah.
What's your opinion of I think it was $200 million in state and local tax incentives provided to Apple, and I think the criticism is they are going to create like 50 jobs for that plant in Waukee.
Yeah, I'm not exactly familiar with that entire thing, but my first impression of it is that it seems to be unbalanced. It really does, and I'm not sure why. There may be good reason for that, but I think the general opinion is that when you put the name of a tech company on something, that means big business and big money. I don't know that that's entirely true, but we'll find out.
Collective bargaining in the 2017 session, that was a major issue, passed a package of changes. What was your overall opinion of that bill? Do you think that was a good bill for the state or a bad bill for the state?
Well, I think it was a move in a good direction, that's for sure, because for, I don't know, for the 30 or so years in which the former collective bargaining bill was in place, in fact, there was not a whole lot of way for taxpayers to be represented at negotiating tables for public employees. I think it was a good bill because it held harmless people like firemen and policemen who would not be able to purchase benefits on the open market at a reasonable price, and it kept them in place. That's an interesting question, because there was I talked to a teacher who said, if we elect you, she said, will you get us that collective bargaining bill back? And I said, tell me how it has hurt you. Well, she said, it hasn't hurt me. And I said, well, okay. I said, so what would be your reason to get the collective bargaining bill back? Well, she said, I've heard that some things have happened in the state. And I said, well, we have to find out if there's really, things that are happening that are bad as a result of it. If it is hurting you, we're going to need to make adjustments. But you've said it's not hurting you. So I said, so what is your concern about education? Oh, she said, don't get me started. I said, well, I already have. I said, so tell me. She went through a litany of things, none of which had to do with collective bargaining or salary or anything like that. Class size, on and on and on, everything. And I said, okay, now if we got you the collective bargaining bill back, which you said isn't hurting you now, how would it resolve all of those difficulties that you just went through? She said, well, I guess it wouldn't. I said, well, my issues have to do with those things, not, not the collective bargaining. I said,
Do you think the bill brought more balance between public sector employees and the individual taxpayers?
I do. I do.
The process of
Yep,
bargaining.
I actually do. I mean, I remember one of the members of in fact, it was the head of a teacher union said that, we put that in place some years ago because of the danger of and to prevent teacher strikes. And my reaction to that was, I don't think we should ever be doing things in public policy based on the threat of what I would even call some type of blackmail, because that should not be the reason that we put things in place. They ought to be for good reason. And by eliminating the taxpayers, I mean, I taught in a state where every teacher package had to be approved by a town vote. And that was an interesting place to work, That was the way it was in Connecticut. There was a town meeting for everything. And that went on the other side of things because, if you built new schools, you weren't going to get a raise. So there was, there's give and take on both sides, but I do believe it did bring balance back.
Overall balance. How about local priorities that you would seek to champion?
Sure.
What do you hear locally from local leaders, from taxpayers, voters, etc. here that they want you to take to Des Moines and champion for them?
Sure. I hear a lot about education. Perhaps that's because that's my background, or one of my backgrounds, but I hear a tremendous amount about that. I hear there's a lot of unrest about our education system here in the local area. There are a lot of good things that we're doing here, but we're also devaluing some things. One of the interesting things I hear from a lot of people is they say, we're no longer teaching cursive writing in schools. And so my question to them is, I said, what's the importance of cursive writing? And of course people have different ideas on what the importance of it is, and a lot of it has to do with tradition, But I said, what, I believe we ought to be writing cursively too, because cursive writing, I said, our country and our state is based on individual dignity, individual liberty, and the whole works. One of the most important ways to do that is by virtue of how you communicate. And one of the most important communication tools that we have is how we write. When you sign your name, those who sign your name, there is no one who has a signature like yours. And when you write, nobody writes like you. And when we take that away, I believe we take away a considerable amount of individuality from people. So that's my reasoning for that. But those are the things that I hear about. I hear about a lot of local issues that the state may not be able to do something about. Lots of people talk about the condition of our streets.
Right.
That's obviously a local issue, but it does transcend that. There's some state involvement, I know, that can come into that.
How about higher cost of education? Because, boy, our colleges seem like they're just adding on all the time, and it's becoming really cost prohibitive for somebody to go and become a teacher, because you'd end up spending how many years just trying to pay off those student loans? Is there something we can do about that, and it's anything on your agenda that you'd say, let's look at that?
Yeah, I think funding of higher education for anything, not just teachers, but for anything, is a real concern. But I think that what we have done in not only the state but across the country is we've provided money to people in the way of loans that to people who are not mature enough to understand what they're getting. I teach at the community college level. Community college loans on debt is higher per capita than four-year colleges, and many of the students who are there who are right out of high school honestly think that that's their money. That's what they believe. I've said this. I mean, where in the world would you find a bank who would extend a $120,000 loan to someone who is 18 years old, except under the auspice of student loan. I think we need to do a much better job of acquainting students who are going into those fields with how they can fund it. One of the things I taught 35 years of public education, and I used to advise my kids. I said, if you want a 4-year degree, you're really bound and determined to get that, but you can't afford it. I said, don't take a loan out. Go to work, find a job, and earn maybe a semester or two's worth of money. Go there, get that done, maybe go back to work. It might take you 7 or 8 years to get your 4-year degree. What you'll come out with is a degree with no debt, which will mean that you can take a job for $25,000, $30,000, well, in those days, maybe a little higher now, without any problem. You can afford that. And you'll also have people lining up at the door to hire you because you have a work ethic that has been displayed. And I had a lot of students who took my advice on that, and they came back and said, that was the best thing that I did. It did take me 7 years, or it took me 8 years to get my 4-year degree. I think we need to get that across. I think there's a lot of people giving what I think is dangerous advice to kids and parents, that, oh yeah, you got to get that 4-year degree, and you got to get it right now. Because another aspect of that is that we have fallen into the belief that when you complete a level of education, whether it's high school or college education, that you are now an expert. You're not an expert. You have gone through an introductory process, and you become the expert when you get on the job, so forth. You might make that argument for somebody in graduate school, but that's hardly an argument also. I suspect that you wouldn't go to a doctor that didn't do an internship.
You become the expert when you get to be as old as all of us, right?
Yeah,
Wisdom.
yeah, there you go.
One more education-related local priority question, and that is,
Sure.
do you advocate for, would you support extension of the 1% local option sales tax for school infrastructure?
Yes, I would. I would do that. I think that's been a beneficial thing. In fact, I have a tax plan that would deal with something else that would perhaps be modeled by that as well, that would have to do with tax relief for the elderly, and that would happen. I think that's been a great thing for our, we piloted it here.
Yes.
And so I think it's been a great thing for our state. I don't particularly agree with these large elementary schools that we have put in place. I don't know that they're really healthy for good education for elementary school kids, but we paid for them.
Beats the 1890 school building, at least, that the students were attending before the new one was constructed, though.
Well, I'm sorry, I didn't quite get that.
Even if they're big, they're new, and they're better than the 1890 local buildings that
absolutely.
our kids were attending.
Right, exactly.
Classes.
That's right.
Yeah. I wanted to, do I have time for one and then a wrap-up?
We have 6 minutes.
Oh, okay. Then the question I wanted to ask before I get to my wrap-ups relates to the Molly Tibbetts tragedy. There's been a lot of discussion since that murder of both at the federal level and at the state level. Are there things that government can or should do, whether it's a required e-verify system for employers or other ideas have been put forth in the wake of that incident? Do you believe there's a role for state government to play in improvements that would perhaps help to prevent tragedies of that kind from happening?
I think there is a role
that would have happened regardless of anything that state government might attempt to do.
Right. It is hard to prevent all crime.
Yes.
It just is. And so regardless of what we put in place, there are probably going to be tragedies that occur.
Yes.
That doesn't minimize or diminish that particular tragedy, nor the one that happened at Iowa State, recently. But I do think that I think there is a role for the state, but there's this intertwinement, I suppose, between what state law can do and what federal law can do, and we have to be careful about structuring the kinds of things or the kinds of laws that we can put in place that would be directed to doing that. I think another, another issue would be the healthcare issue. What we've done to help with healthcare because of the Affordable Care Act is we now have put in place a health benefit plan in the state, which is like insurance, but it's not insurance, because if it was, it would have to come under the Affordable Care Act, and therefore it would drive the cost up. What we've done is put it in effect through the Farm Bureau. It's going to be managed by Wellmark, and it works very similar to health insurance, and that's, I think November 1st is the enrollment start for that, and it goes into effect on January 1st. That's going to provide for people the opportunity to do what they would like to have done with the Affordable Care Act but couldn't afford it, But this will be something that will be good for Iowans. So I think the same thing is true on the state level. We have to find ways to put into effect some things, some processes, procedures that would be helpful. I think E-Verify is an example of one of the things that could happen.
But largely, matters related to immigration are federal
Yeah,
matters. There's
largely
a limited
they
role
are.
for state government.
There is, and I know that places have tried that. I forget the name of the town in Pennsylvania that tried something like that, and they're, constantly under some kind of probably even legal things that throws them up. So.
Then I want to move to the wrap-up question, and that is, give you an opportunity just to state why you believe you're the best choice in this race, and why a voter should turn to you and send you to Des Moines for the next session of the legislature.
Yeah, the issues that I have, the three main issues, and one of them is what I call foundational family values. I believe our government needs to make sure that it, especially in this day and age, more than ever before, it has to attend to those things. Education issue is another one. I believe our education system in the state, in fact in the nation, has gone so far off track because it's no longer doing what it was intended, and that was to teach and develop good citizens. That's what the purpose of our education system was to do. That doesn't minimize the academics, but what we've done is to focus and narrow down on some very small issues. And we're teaching kids to the test. We're teaching standardized test procedures. I talked with this is incredible. I talked with somebody who is early childhood educator, someone who deals with kids from birth to 4 years of age, who said she was appalled at the fact that she is now under the constraint of not allowing those kids to play as much during what she's doing because they have to teach them how to take standardized tests. I said, "You're kidding me. From birth to 4? And she said, "That's right." And I talked to a kindergarten teacher who had exactly the same thing to say about that. She said, "It's just ridiculous what we have to do." Play, I have a doctorate in this area, play is instrumental to early childhood education. Instrumental. And what we've done is to eliminate one of the best things for learning by doing something like that. My third issue has to do with the elderly. I believe that we need to put in place procedures and things that we've never thought about before to help them. Our older folks are living older and healthier lives, but many of them are living beyond their resources. And then we raise taxes on them, and they have no place to go. They have no answers for that. That's a tragedy, and we have to do something about that. And I've got some ideas. We're going to have to be creative about that, and I've got some ideas that I think will work. So that's.
I want to thank you for your time this morning. We appreciate you sitting down with us, taking our questions, and best of luck in the campaign.
Well, thanks, Mike. Thank you all.